The courtroom was way too big for a 7-year-old kid. And yeah, Mia looked like she might disappear right into that wooden chair if she curled up any tighter. Her legs dangled, not even close to touching the floor. Her tiny hands were knotted into the fur of the dog pressed against her side. Shadow, a retired K-9 from Denver Metro. The only thing in that entire room keeping her from falling apart. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, but somehow that sound felt louder than the people. Maybe because everyone in the room kept glancing at her like she was, I don't know, a problem they wished would magically fix itself. Like she was the reason this trial was dragging. Like she was the complication. Not the man sitting across the aisle. The accused. Her father. And the moment her eyes flicked toward him, just for a second, he smiled. Not a nice smile. Not a "hey kid, it's okay." No. It was this cold, thin, razor-sharp smirk that said, "I still own your fear." Mia jerked her gaze down immediately. Her whole body stiffened. Shadow felt it. His big head shifted, leaning harder against her knee, like he was saying, "Hey, breathe." But she couldn't. Not really. Her chest shook in tiny, uneven breaths. The kind a kid makes right before they either faint or burst into tears. Either one would have made perfect sense. The judge hadn't even walked in yet. This was just the waiting part. The quiet part. The part that should have been easy. But for Mia, this was already the nightmare. People whispered, soft, but not soft enough. Poor thing. Won't even talk. How do we convict someone with no testimony? Maybe the dad isn't as bad as they're making him sound. And Mia heard enough of it to crush her deeper into the seat. Shadow's breathing was the only steady rhythm in the entire room. Slow, heavy, calm. Mia kept inching closer, like she was trying to hide inside that warmth. Her hand twisted deeper into his fur, as if she were holding on to the edge of a cliff. Time 9 hums. Then, this tiny, blink and you'll miss it moment. Her father lifted his chin at her. Just a small motion, but it hit like a slap. Her shoulders jerked so hard, the bench creaked. Shadow reacted. Not aggressively. No growl, no snap. But his ears flicked straight up. His muscles tightened. His eyes locked on the man. Even without knowing dogs, you could tell Shadow recognized danger. He smelled it. He felt it. He knew exactly who the threat was. Mia didn't look at her father again. She stared at the floor, then her shoes, then Shadow's paws. Like if she stared hard enough, maybe she could sink into the floor, shrink, vanish. And then, the door at the front swung open. "Please rise." Everyone stood. Chairs scraped. Shoes shuffled. Even that noise made Mia flinch. Her father rose slowly, smoothing the sleeves of his suit like he was preparing for some grand performance. Judge Eleanor Wright walked in, stern, steady, gray hair pulled back tight. She scanned the courtroom with an expression that could calm a storm or start one. When her eyes reached Mia, she paused. Just a fraction. But she paused, then nodded once as if acknowledging something only she could see. Be seated. Mia lowered herself carefully, flinching when the wood touched her legs. Shadow didn't sit until she was settled. Then he curled beside her again, his tail brushing her ankle every few breaths. The prosecutor shuffled papers, whispering to an assistant. Mia didn't hear a word. Everything felt muffled, like she was underwater. All she could hear was her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Too fast, too loud. Her father cleared his throat. That single sound made her grip Shadow so tight his fur twisted between her fingers. Shadow shifted closer, pressing his chest against her shin, grounding her with every breath. Someone whispered behind her, "This kid won't last 5 minutes on the stand." Mia swallowed so hard her throat clicked. Shadow lifted his head. He looked at her. Really looked. Right into her face, and for a second, just a second, her breathing synced with his. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Steady, warm, real. If Shadow wasn't there, if he had been taken away, Mia wouldn't have survived the first minute in that room. She wouldn't have stood a chance, because right here, in Boulder County Court, with her father staring daggers at her, Mia wasn't a witness. She was a trembling child thrown into a battlefield. And Shadow? Shadow was the only shield she had. If part one felt tense, then the moment after it, yeah, it dropped Mia straight into something way worse. Because as soon as everyone settled again, you could almost feel the courtroom leaning in, waiting for her, this tiny girl, to somehow carry the weight of a whole trial on her shoulders. And she tried. God, she really tried. The prosecutor, Ms. Avery, crouched beside her with this soft voice. Not too soft, not too loud, just gentle enough. Mia, sweetheart, do you remember what we practiced? You can speak whenever you're ready, okay? Mia nodded, or kind of nodded. Her chin twitched down, that's all. Then she opened her mouth. Well, opened is generous. It was more like she wanted to open it. Her lips parted, just a crack, like a stuck door. Her throat tightened instantly. You could actually see the muscles clamp up. She sucked in a breath. Shaky, sharp. Tried again. Nothing. Not a whisper. Not even a squeak. Just silence. A silence so heavy it felt like it pulled the air out of the room. Shadow pressed closer to Mia's leg, nudging her hand with his nose. But even with him there, warm, steady, grounding, her voice just wouldn't come. And that's when Marcus Hale decided to strike. He stood up slow, casual, like he wasn't about to throw a verbal grenade into a room already on edge. "Your Honor," he said, "as we can all see, the witness is struggling." He paused, letting the word struggling hang in the air like a stain. Then he turned slightly toward the jury, giving them that polished, faint smile he used on TV interviews. In fact, he continued, I believe she's not speaking because there's nothing truthful for her to say. A couple of people actually nodded. Mia's shoulders caved in like someone had pushed her from behind. Ms. Avery shot up. Objection! But Hale lifted a hand, smooth, patient, like he was the reasonable adult in the room. I'm simply pointing out the obvious, he said. If this child had something to say, she would say it. The jury murmured, low, soft, dangerous. And the worst part? It wasn't loud enough for Mia to understand the words, but she understood the tone. Doubt, worry, judgment. And that stuff is louder than any sentence. Mia's eyes got shiny. She blinked fast, trying desperately not to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Not in front of all these strangers waiting to judge her. Her father leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, lips twitching. He didn't smile fully. Just enough. Enough for her to notice. Enough to remind her of the words he'd repeated so many times. No one's ever gonna believe you. And sitting here now, it was like the room agreed with him. One woman whispered, maybe she imagined it. Another muttered, kids lie when they're scared. Someone else said, if it really happened, wouldn't she talk? Every word, every syllable, landed on Mia's shoulders like bricks. She folded inward even more, chin nearly touching her chest. Shadow shifted his paw onto her shoe, soft, but firm, like a reminder. I'm here. Don't disappear. Mia's hands trembled. Her fingers twisted together, then into Shadow's fur, then back again, like she couldn't decide whether to hold on or give up. Ms. Avery tried again. Mia, sweetheart, it's okay. You're safe. You can tell us what happened. But the moment she said, tell us, Mia's entire body tensed. It was like her voice was a tiny bird trapped inside her rib cage, throwing itself against bone but never making it out. She opened her mouth one more time. Her lips quivered. Her breathing hitched. And then her throat locked again. A dry click echoed when she swallowed. Hale stepped forward a little. See? He said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. This isn't trauma, Your Honor. This is confusion. She doesn't know what's real and what she dreamed. The jury murmured louder now. A man whispered, poor kid, probably misunderstood everything. Another said, are we sure the father did anything? Time 800 mems. Mia heard that one. Her entire body jerked. She wasn't just scared now. She was unraveling. Like every piece of her was coming loose at the seams. Her breath sped up. Ragged, uneven. Her tiny shoulders shook. She lifted her hands to her throat, pressing her fingers to her skin like she could pry the words out if she just tried hard enough. And then, the smallest sound escaped her. Not a word. Not even a letter. Just this tiny broken gasp, a sound that said everything she couldn't. Shadow rose immediately, planting himself tighter against her leg. His head lifted, eyes sharp, scanning the courtroom like he was identifying every person hurting her with their whispers and their doubt. But Mia couldn't look at any of them. Not the jury. Not Hale. Not even the judge. She stared at her lap, tears slipping down her cheeks, her silence swallowing her whole. And for the people in that courtroom who didn't believe her, that silence looked like guilt. But for anyone who really understood trauma, anyone who saw the way her fingers trembled and her breath collapsed in on itself, it was obvious. This wasn't a child who couldn't remember. This was a child who remembered too much to speak. If the silence in part 2 felt like it could crush a grown adult, then what came next? Yeah, it almost knocked Mia right out of her chair. Because right after Hale's little performance, right after those whispers of doubt sliced through the room, Mia's body just gave up. Not fully, not dramatically, but you could see her starting to fade, like the lights behind her eyes were flickering, struggling to stay on. Her breathing hitched, her fingers loosened, her shoulders dipped forward, and then her whole world tilted. It wasn't dramatic like in movies. No gasping, no falling out of the chair. Just this slow collapse inward, the kind kids make when they're about to faint from pure fear. The courtroom spun for her, tilting sideways. She grabbed the edge of the seat, but her hand slipped. Her palm was sweaty, her vision going soft, her body drifting. That's when Shadow moved. Not like a normal dog, not even like a trained police dog. He moved like he knew exactly how fast she was falling, and how close she was to disappearing. He pressed his entire body against her side, shoulder, ribs, all of it, leaning into her with this steady weight that forced her upright. Like he was saying, "No, not now. Stay with me." And the crazy part? It worked. The moment Shadow touched her, Mia sucked in a thin, shaky breath. Then another, and another. Each one pulling her back from that dark, floaty place she was slipping into. You could see the color return to her face. Not much, just enough that she didn't look like she was about to hit the floor. Her hand lifted, trembling, landing on Shadow's neck. Not petting, not holding, just anchoring, like she was tying herself to him so she wouldn't drift away. Shadow didn't move, didn't look around, didn't bark. He just breathed. Slow, warm, deep. And somehow, that was enough. Enough to steady her. Mia's forehead dropped gently onto the top of his head, like she couldn't hold it up anymore. A soft, strangled little sound slipped from her. Not a word. Just exhaustion leaking out. Shadow nudged her hand with his nose. Once, twice. Purposeful, calm. Almost like he was reminding her, rate, slow. I'm right here. You're okay. Something shifted in the courtroom. Not loud, but real. People stopped whispering, stopped guessing. stopped judging. For the first time, they were actually looking at Mia, not the idea of her. Judge Eleanor Wright leaned forward, elbows on the bench, eyes sharp but softened at the edges. Just a half-second of understanding. Not pity, but recognition. Then she spoke, quiet but firm. Let the record reflect that the support animal is providing necessary stabilization for the witness. Necessary stabilization. Her judge-approved way of saying, this dog is saving this child's life right now, and all of you better pay attention. Shadow didn't react, didn't lift his head, didn't break focus. His whole world right then was Mia. Her little fingers curled deeper into his fur, twisting like she was holding on to the railing of a ship in a storm. Her breath shook, but now there was rhythm. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Shadow leaned harder against her, his chest rising and falling against her leg, grounding her, bringing her back. Officer Grant Holloway, 2 rows back, noticed immediately. He leaned forward, whispering, "Good boy. That's it. Keep her upright." Even Marcus Hale paused, pen hovering in his hand, maybe annoyed, maybe confused, maybe surprised that a dog was outperforming his psychological pressure. But Shadow didn't care about strategy, or legal tactics, or manipulative lawyers. Shadow cared about one thing: Mia Collins staying conscious and breathing. Her father watched all of it. And that did something dark to the room. He stared at Shadow with this cold irritation, like the dog was ruining something for him, like Mia wasn't supposed to have help. Shadow lifted his head, just slightly, meeting the man's eyes. Not a growl, not a bark, just a stare. A stare that said, without a single sound, "Try it. Just try it." The tension in the room pulled tight as a rope. But even in that heavy silence, Mia's breathing finally settled into something close to steady. Her forehead still rested on Shadow's head. Her fingers tangled in his fur. But she wasn't fading anymore. She was right there, shaking, terrified, fragile, but present. And honestly, in a moment where everything felt like it was breaking, Shadow was the only thing that didn't. Now let me ask you something. Just honestly between us, if you were sitting in that courtroom, would you feel more A, angry, B, heartbroken, or C, protective as hell, if Shadow standing beside her in that courtroom felt like a miracle? Then honestly, the day they first met was something even bigger, stranger, maybe even fated. Because back then, Mia wasn't just scared. She was gone. Like someone had unplugged the part of her that connected to the world. It started 4 months earlier at the Denver Children's Unit. This pale blue building that always smelled like crayons and disinfectant. You know the type. The kind that tries way too hard to pretend it's not filled with trauma. Walls covered in posters about deep breaths and safe feelings. Little plastic chairs in bright colors. Everything cheerful. Everything wrong. Mia had been brought there after everything that happened with her father. The EMTs said she hadn't spoken a single word since the night of the incident. Not to officers, not to doctors, not even to her aunt, who'd taken custody. Silence had swallowed her whole. Inside therapy room 204, she sat curled in the far corner, knees tucked under her chin, hands gripping the sleeves of her sweatshirt like she was holding herself together with her fists. Every time a therapist took a step toward her, just one, Mia would jolt like she'd been shocked. Her breathing would spike, her eyes would go wide, and she'd claw backward until her shoulders hit the wall. Nobody could get near her. Nobody could even sit on the same side of the room. She was terrified of everything that looked human. And honestly, who could blame her? The staff tried everything. Gentle voices, soft toys, sand trays, picture cards, every trick in the book. Nothing touched her. Nothing made a dent. They whispered outside the door, "Poor sweet girl. She's too far inside. We may need long-term inpatient care," her aunt cried every time she left the building. Then, one morning, Officer Grant Holloway showed up. Big guy, quiet voice, wearing that particular brand of exhaustion only cops and nurses ever seem to have. And beside him walked a dog. Not just a dog. A wall of fur and muscle with amber eyes that saw far too much. Shadow. Older now, retired after an injury. A slight stiffness in his right leg, but he still moved like he could take on an earthquake and win. The badge was gone from his collar, but you could tell he wasn't done being a protector. The therapists protested immediately. "She's afraid of people, not dogs. What if he scares her more?" "We don't know her triggers." Holloway just shook his head. "She doesn't need talking. She needs presence." And without waiting for full permission, well, he waited a second, but then he kind of gave up. He opened the door and let Shadow inside. What happened next wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, wasn't a movie moment. It was quiet, ridiculously quiet. Shadow didn't run to her, didn't sniff her, didn't make a sound. He just walked in, slow, steady, and lowered himself onto the floor. Not facing her, turned slightly sideways, like he didn't want to trap her, like he knew she needed an exit. He lay down, and he waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. At first, Mia didn't even notice him. She was lost in those silent sobs kids make when they're trying not to exist. Then, her eyes flicked up, and she froze. Shadow was still, not staring, not inching closer, just breathing. Soft, warm, real. Mia blinked. Her tiny hands loosened from her sleeves. Another minute passed. She slid 1 foot forward, then the other. Barely an inch. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the therapist behind the glass pressed both hands to her mouth. Mia dropped to her hands and knees and crawled, literally crawled, across the carpet toward him. Jerky, uncertain. Like she thought he might disappear if she got too close. Shadow didn't move, not even a twitch. And then they touched. Her fingers brushed the fur at his neck, just the edge, and something in her broke open. She didn't gasp, didn't scream, didn't speak. She just collapsed forward into him, burying her face in his neck and sobbing. Not little sobs, big, shaking, choking cries from somewhere deep and bruised. Shadow lifted his head and rested his chin gently on her back, not pushing, not controlling, just being there, holding her the only way a dog knows how. She cried so long the carpet darkened beneath them, and when the sobs finally slowed, when the shaking softened, something almost impossible happened. She whispered, "Barely there, barely a breath." Shadow. Officer Holloway's hand slipped from the door frame. The therapist burst into tears. And Shadow. He didn't react like it was a miracle. He reacted like he'd been waiting for that word all along. If that first whisper of his name felt like a spark, then what came after? Yeah, it was the moment the fire actually caught. Because the truth was, Mia wasn't the only one in that therapy room who'd been shattered long before they brought her in. Shadow was broken too, just in a different way. And the wild part? Neither of them knew they were about to fix each other. So, let me back up a second. Before Shadow ever stepped into Mia's life, he'd been part of the Denver Metro K-9 unit, one of the best. The kind handlers bragged about in quiet voices. He'd run drug busts, night searches, missing child calls, all the things people never hear about. But then came his last mission. Nobody talked about it much around Mia. They kept those details away from her. But adults forget. Kids hear things anyway. They soak up whispers like sponges. And what Mia overheard, piece by piece, was this. Shadow got hurt saving an officer. Badly hurt. Some guy they were chasing cornered a rookie with a knife. Shadow lunged. Took the hit instead. Deep cut along his side. Muscle torn. Nerve damaged. They saved him. Surgery. Rehab. Months of trying. But he never ran the same again. And because the department budget was tight, as always, someone stamped his file with a word that stung worse than the injury. Unfit. Or the less polite version people muttered in break rooms. K9 Hong. A broken tool. Replaceable. Shadow didn't know that word, but he understood the quiet, the empty kennel, the way no one asked for him anymore, the long days lying still, waiting for a command that never came. And Mia? She knew exactly what that felt like. She'd been called things too. Not to her face. Grown-ups think kids don't understand. But she heard enough to stitch the meaning together. Empty witness. Not reliable. No verbal testimony. We can't use her if she won't speak. A witness with nothing inside. A hollow little girl. Two souls tossed aside for things they couldn't control. And that's why what happened next felt so cosmic, like two puzzle pieces finally clicking after months in the wrong box. It happened 3 days after their first meeting. Officer Holloway brought Shadow back to room 204. This time, Shadow walked in faster, almost eager, if a dog can be eager. Mia was already on the carpet, not in the corner, but in the middle. Still small, still shaky, but facing the door this time. Shadow saw her, ears perked, tail low but wagging. Mia whispered, "Hi." Soft, barely a breath, but a word. Holloway stepped back, giving them space. "Let's try something simple today. Nothing pushy. Just connection." He crouched, patted his knee. "Shadow, sit." Shadow didn't sit. Not because he couldn't. It was basic, elementary. But he didn't look at Holloway at all. His eyes were locked on Mia. The therapist stiffened. "Is something wrong with his training?" "No," Holloway murmured. "He's waiting." Mia blinked. "Waiting for what?" Holloway didn't answer. He just nodded toward her. "Why don't you try?" Mia shook her head fast. He won't listen to me." "You don't know that." Quiet. Steady. She hesitated. Looked at Shadow. Shadow looked back. Deep. Patient. Like he could feel her heartbeat from across the room. Mia swallowed. Her fingers curled. Then, "Sit." Shadow sat. Instant. Precise. Like she'd pulled a string tied straight to his bones. The room went silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to shut up. He listened," Mia whispered. Holloway exhaled. A breath he'd been holding for a year. "Yeah, he did." The therapist wiped her eyes. Shadow chose her. Mia's lips wobbled. Not from fear. Something else, something warm. A memory of trust trying to come back to life. She tried again, a little louder this time. "Shadow, lay down." Shadow flopped onto the floor so fast his paws slid. It made Mia giggle. An actual giggle. A tiny, cracked, sunlight through clouds laugh. And Shadow? He wagged his tail so hard his whole butt scooted across the carpet. Two broken beings. One forgotten by the force. One dismissed by the courts. Suddenly weren't broken in the same way anymore. Piece by piece, they started rebuilding each other. Her voice came back. His purpose came back. Her courage returned. His spark reignited. In that quiet little room with crayon posters peeling and the smell of antiseptic in the air, something healed that doctors and judges and therapy books couldn't touch. A girl who thought she had nothing left. A dog who'd been told he was done. Finding each other. Hearing each other. Saving each other. And neither of them knew that this tiny moment, Mia whispering a single word and Shadow obeying, was the first domino in a chain that would one day shake a courtroom to its core. If Part 5 was all about healing and quiet miracles, Then what came next felt like someone ripped the air out of the room and replaced it with pure poison. Because right when Mia finally started breathing normally again, right when Shadow had steadied her, Marcus Hale decided it was time to strike. And he didn't strike like a lawyer. He struck like a predator. It started subtle. Hale pushed back his chair, smoothed his expensive suit jacket, slow, casual, like he had all the time in the world, and walked toward the witness stand. "Your Honor," he said, voice dripping fake sweetness, "may I approach? Just to comfort the child." Judge Wright narrowed her eyes, suspicious, but she nodded. "1 minute, and keep your distance." "Yes, ma'am." A polite smile, a respectful nod. All an act. The moment he stepped away from the defense table, the air changed. You know that feeling when someone with bad intentions enters your space? That cold slither up your spine? Yeah, that. Shadow sensed it instantly. His ears snapped up. Muscles tightened like a pulled bowstring. His tail went rigid. A low vibration. Not a growl, just breath with teeth behind it, rumbled from his chest. But Hale kept smiling. He walked slowly, hands clasped like some Sunday school teacher. "Hi, Mia," he said softly, tilting his head, pretending he was gentle. "I know this is tough, sweetheart." Sweetheart. God. The word sounded rotten coming from his mouth. Mia shrank back, knuckles whitening around Shadow's fur. Her eyes stayed fixed near his shoes, like looking higher might somehow give him more power. Shadow leaned into her, shoulder sliding between her and Hale, protective, steady, silent, but ready. Hale's smile widened, too wide. And then, right when everyone's focus drifted, when the prosecutor checked her files, when the bailiff adjusted something near the door, Hale leaned in, just enough so only Mia and the dog could hear him. His voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. "You open that little mouth of yours, and I swear I'll make that mutt disappear from Colorado." Mia froze, like literally froze, spine rigid, fingers stiff. Even her blinking stalled. For a 7-year-old who'd already lived through hell, those words were nuclear. Shadow heard it. Every syllable. His ears twitched. Muscles coiled. His head lifted, eyes snapping to Hale's face with a look that said, "If dogs could talk. I heard you. I understood you." And I will not forget, Mia's breath collapsed into a tiny broken gasp. Not loud, just enough to feel like her chest caved in. Hale straightened instantly, masking the threat with that polished smile. "She's very frightened," he told the judge, voice soft, phony concern dripping off every word. "I think she might be confused." Confused. That word again. The way he said it made the blood in the room boil. Judge Wright's stare sharpened. "That's enough, Mr. Hale. Step back." "Oh, of course," he said sweetly. "Just trying to help." Help. Right. He stepped away, hands behind his back, the perfect picture of innocence. The jury nodded along, fooled by charm, confidence, polished lies. But he hadn't fooled the two beings he wanted to break. Not Mia, not Shadow. Shadow's head tracked Hale all the way back to the defense table. Eyes locked, posture taut. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't lunge. But that stare was louder than any sound he could have made. Mia pressed her forehead into Shadow's shoulder, her hands trembling violently. Not because she didn't understand the threat. She understood it too well. She'd heard threats like that before. From someone who once called himself her father. Someone who wanted to control her silence. And now another man was doing the same. Hale sat down, picked up his pen, and wrote like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just threatened a child. Like he hadn't just threatened a retired K-9 who'd saved more lives than he ever would. Mia squeezed her eyes shut, tears rolling down her cheeks. Shadow nudged her hand, steadying her, breathing slow so she could try to follow. But the damage of that whisper, yeah, it was deep. Because Hale didn't just scare her, he hit her exactly where she'd break. Her voice, her silence, her dog. He wanted her frozen, wanted her quiet. And for a moment, a long, shaking moment, it worked. But here's the thing Hale didn't know. Shadow heard him. Holloway saw enough to get suspicious. And Mia wasn't done. Not by a long shot. And the wildest part? After that disgusting little whisper from Hale, the courtroom had no idea something was about to flip. Because Mia may have frozen, may have shaken so hard, her bracelet clicked against Shadow's collar. But Shadow? Shadow wasn't shaken. He was calculating. You could see it in the way he sat there, still, silent, a little too still for a normal dog. Ears pointed forward, tail stiff, muscles locked, eyes studying Hale like he was searching that man's soul for weak spots. And then, of course, Hale tried to walk away like nothing happened. He brushed off his jacket, gave the jury a polite nod, that smug little smile curling on his face, the kind that said, "See? Easy. Done. She's scared. She'll stay quiet." But Shadow wasn't done. Hale took 2 steps past the witness stand, just 2, and Shadow rose to his feet. Slow, smooth, deliberate, not aggressive, not dramatic, more like ghost-like, like he moved through water instead of air. Mia tensed. Judge Wright looked up. Holloway leaned forward in his seat. Even Hale stopped walking. Half a second, like he felt something behind him. Then Shadow stepped forward. One paw, then another. Tail relaxed. Ears slightly back. Head tilted in that soft, gentle angle that made him look like any therapy dog in any hospital hallway. Hale turned, fake smiling again, pretending he wasn't startled. "Oh," he said lightly. "Hello there, buddy." And that's when it happened. Shadow leaned in and licked Hale's cheek. Just one quick, soft lick. Nothing aggressive, Nothing loud, nothing threatening. Just this sweet, gentle little slip of his tongue across the man's perfectly groomed face. And the entire courtroom exploded. People burst out laughing. Someone clapped. A juror snorted so loudly she covered her face. Even Judge Wright cracked a tiny smile she tried, and failed, to hide. To the room, it was adorable, harmless. "Aw, he likes you. Look at that. He's picking favorites." Hale froze. Absolutely froze. His face twitched. That tight, twitchy anger people get when they're humiliated in front of an audience they thought they controlled. He tried to smile, but that smile was shaking. Bad. Because Mr. Perfect Lawyer, Mr. Expensive Suit, Mr. I own this room, had just been licked on the cheek like a volunteer at a puppy adoption event. But to Shadow? Oh, that lick meant something else entirely. Because here's the part nobody noticed. Nobody except three. Shadow had gotten close on purpose. Close enough for the tiny, almost invisible mic sewn into the base of his collar to catch every word Hale had whispered earlier. Behind Shadow's fur, a small green light flashed once, barely visible, but Holloway saw it, and his jaw tightened hard. Every threat, every hissed word, every cruel syllable recorded. And Shadow? That lick, that was his cover move. A way to get close without suspicion. A way to say, "Don't worry, Mia. I'm handling this." Shadow returned to Mia's side, sitting taller now, chest slightly puffed. Not cocky, not aggressive, just proud. Purposeful. Like he'd just done something important, even if nobody else knew it yet. Mia leaned into him, still trembling, but her hand found his fur and curled tight. Shadow nudged her fingers gently, breathing slow, steady, a silent, "It's okay. I've got your back." Across the room, Hale wiped his cheek, disgust twisting his face. The mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough for anyone paying attention to finally see the real man underneath. Most people weren't paying attention, but three were. Mia, Shadow, Officer Grant Holloway. And in a room full of lies, manipulation, and intimidation, a single gentle lick had just changed everything. Now let me ask you something, honestly, between us. If you were sitting in that courtroom, would Shadow's move make you feel more A, proud, B, relieved, or C, ready to see justice hit Hale like a truck? And honestly, after Shadow's quiet little act of rebellion, you'd think the courtroom energy would shift, right? Like maybe people would finally look at Mia and see a child who needed protection. Not suspicion. But nope. If anything, things got worse. Because Marcus Hale wasn't done. Not even close. He waited just long enough for the laughter to settle, for people to wipe tears from their eyes after Shadow's cute little lick, before he stood up again and flipped gears like switching masks. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "I'd like to call our next witness, Ms. Valerie Trent, from Phoenix, Arizona." Phoenix. a word that sounded hot, sharp, like danger drifting in from the desert. A woman in a beige blazer walked in, clutching her purse like it held the whole truth of the universe. She smiled politely at the judge, at the jury, at the bailiff, and then at Hale. That smile said everything. She was here for him, not for justice, not for truth, for him. She took the stand, straightened her skirt, folded her hands like a student waiting to read aloud. "Ms. Trent," Hale began, voice dripping fake warmth, "thank you for traveling all the way from Arizona to help clarify some misunderstandings." "Of course," she said sweetly. "I just want to help." "Yeah, help. People like her always want to help." Hale paced slowly, hands behind his back, the picture of professionalism. "Now, you told me earlier that you've known Mr. Collins for, what was it, 8 years?" "Yes," she said. "He's always been a wonderful, patient father. Very gentle with Mia." Gentle. Mia flinched so violently, Shadow pressed his entire weight against her to steady her again. But the jury, they were nodding, nodding. And Hale, he wasn't finished twisting the knife. "Did you ever see him angry? Violent? Dangerous?" "Never," she said firmly. "Not once." Lie. A giant, oily lie. But Hale smiled like he'd found something holy. "And what would you say about the accusations being made by the child today?" Ms. Trent sighed dramatically. "I think she's confused, poor thing. Traumatized children sometimes. You know, imagine things. Mix memories. Fill in blanks." There it was. The line. The narrative. Mia is imagining everything. Hale turned to the jury with a face that screamed, "See? I told you." And the jurors, maybe tired, maybe overwhelmed, maybe too eager to believe a calm adult over a silent child, shifted in their seats. One crossed her arms, one leaned forward, one frowned, and the courtroom started slipping, sliding, tilting toward the wrong side of justice. Mia's father, sitting there in his clean shirt and fake tears, covered his face with his hands like he was heartbroken. But it wasn't acting this time, because when he lowered his hands, real tears clung to his eyelashes. Not guilt, not shame. Relief. He could feel victory, taste freedom, and that terrified Mia's aunt in the row behind them. Her knuckles turned white around her knees. "Your Honor," Hale said confidently, "this witness proves the child's testimony is, at best, unreliable. At worst," he glanced at Mia, "delusional." Mia's chest tightened so fast she barely had time to breathe. Her throat cinched, eyes burning, ears ringing. Shadow shifted in front of her that like he wanted to block her view, even from words. She curled into him, arms wrapping around his neck like she was holding on to the last warm thing left on earth. Because to Mia, that's exactly what he was. Her father was crying because he sensed victory. The jury was wavering. The Phoenix witness was lying without a shred of guilt. The judge's expression, flat, unreadable, felt impossible to decipher. The whole room felt like it was sinking underwater, inch by inch, and Mia was drowning at the center of it. And Shadow. Shadow was the only one trying to keep her afloat. His breathing steady against her chest, his weight anchoring her, his fur warm against a world that felt cold and cruel. Officer Holloway clenched his fists in the back row, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. He knew Hale's witnesses were fake, scripted, practiced, but he also knew the brutal truth. Most juries believe adults over children, especially silent children, especially terrified children, especially children holding on to a dog like he's oxygen. And right then, justice didn't feel blind. It felt crooked, dangerously crooked. Because the more Hale spoke, the more the courtroom leaned toward him, and the smaller Mia became, the harder it was for anyone else to truly see her. Except Shadow, the only living soul in that room who never doubted her. Not once, not ever. He pressed tighter against her, eyes narrowing, not in fear but in a quiet, simmering defiance, like he knew the storm wasn't over, and he knew they'd need him to survive it. And honestly, after that mess in Part 8, the lies, the fake witness, the jury leaning the wrong direction, you'd think Mia would just crumble, like any kid would, like any adult probably would. But what happened next was so strange, so out of nowhere. It felt like the whole courtroom tripped over itself. Because right when Judge Wright cleared her throat, right when it looked like she was preparing a preliminary ruling, and trust me, it wasn't going to be in Mia's favor, something shifted. Not in the room, in Mia. She sat there, tiny and curled up against Shadow's side, hair falling over half her face, fingers buried in his fur, breath shaking, shoulders trembling, looking like she was one wrong sentence away from fainting. But then, out of absolutely nowhere, her shaking stopped. Shadow noticed first. His ears perked. His eyes flicked up to her face. Then Mia lifted her head. Slow, careful, like a child waking from a nightmare. And then she did the strangest, softest, most impossible thing. She smiled. Just a tiny smile. Barely there. But real. And it hit the room like a crack in glass. The whole vibe shifted. Not loudly, but undeniably. Judge Wright paused mid-sentence. The prosecutor blinked like she misheard something. One juror leaned forward. And Hale, Marcus Hale, the man who'd been winning for the last hour straight, froze. His face twitched. His eyebrows jerked. His pen slipped between his fingers. Because let's be honest, a scared kid about to lose doesn't smile. A kid who's given up doesn't smile. A kid expecting the worst doesn't smile. No. A smile like that only comes from one place. A kid who knows something the adults don't. Hale tried to recover instantly, cleared his throat, straightened his jacket. organized his papers like everything was still under control, but it wasn't. For the first time since the trial started, he didn't look certain. He looked rattled. Mia stared at him. Not long, not boldly, just for a second. And that single second made the hair on Hale's neck stand up. It was like she was saying, "You think I'm scared? Watch me." Then, without warning, Shadow lifted his head, slow, steady, and locked eyes with Hale. And that look? That wasn't a dog staring at a man. That was a guardian staring down a monster. Shadow didn't growl, didn't move, didn't do anything dramatic. But the message in his eyes was crystal clear. Game over. Hale swallowed hard. Actually swallowed. You could see his throat bob. Because somewhere inside him, somewhere in that dark place where he kept his fear and his secrets, he knew Mia's smile wasn't random. He knew Shadow wasn't just sitting there for comfort. He knew something was wrong. Not wrong for Mia, wrong for him. The jury didn't understand the moment, but they felt it. Their eyes darted between Mia's tiny smile and Hale's sudden stiffness. People in the audience leaned forward, whispering, "Why is she smiling? Did something happen? Does she know something?" Even Judge Wright tilted her head, studying Mia like she was seeing her for the very first time. Not a traumatized child, but a witness holding something powerful. And Hale? He lost rhythm, for the first time. He shuffled his papers twice, dropped his pen, dropped it again, trying to pick it up. Shadow didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't break eye contact. He just stared, unmoving, like he was watching a criminal unravel. Meanwhile, Mia, she wasn't shaking anymore, wasn't shrinking, wasn't folding in on herself. She was calm, still small, still scared, but with a spark in her eyes, a tiny, fierce spark that said, "I'm not done. The story's not over, and you don't get the final word." The courtroom didn't know it yet, but that smile, that tiny, trembling, ridiculously brave smile, was the first crack in Hale's perfect wall of lies. The first sign he wasn't just losing control. He had already lost it. Shadow shifted closer to her, bumping his head gently against her shoulder, almost proud. Like he knew her courage in that 1 second was bigger than anything Hale had thrown at her all trial. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because sometimes courage doesn't look like shouting or pointing or standing tall. Sometimes courage is a tiny kid smiling at the man who tried everything to break her. Sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes courage is small. And sometimes courage is enough to make a grown liar flinch. And honestly, if Mia's little smile in Part 9 cracked the first line in Hale's armor, then what happened next? Yeah, it didn't just crack the wall. It blew the whole damn thing to dust. It started quiet. Way too quiet. Judge Wright leaned back, studying Hale with narrowed, suspicious eyes. The prosecutor shuffled papers like something didn't add up. Jurors whispered, trying to decode that tiny smile from a tiny girl. And at the very back of the courtroom, Officer Grant Holloway slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Not fast, not dramatic, just calm, purposeful. He pulled out a small black device, about the size of a car key, with one tiny button. He didn't stand, didn't shout, didn't call attention to himself. He just watched Hale for one long, steady second and pressed the button. A low crackle filled the courtroom speakers, barely noticeable, like radio static from a forgotten century. Hale looked up, annoyed, confused. "Your Honor, is the audio system—" Then it happened. A voice, his voice, echoed through the speakers, cold, cruel, undeniable. "You open that little mouth of yours, and I swear I'll make that mutt disappear from Colorado." Everything stopped. Pens froze mid-air. Jaws dropped. A woman gasped so loudly it echoed. Hale went pale, ghost white, like all the blood in his body sprinted for the exit. "No, no, that's, Your Honor, that's taken out of—" But the speakers weren't done, because Holloway pressed the button again. Static. Then, "Make sure the tech deletes those files before morning." A juror covered her mouth. Click. "If the second set of photos surfaces, the case falls apart. Handle it." The bailiff swore under his breath. Another, "She won't talk. She's scared. It's perfect." Then, "They don't need the real medical report. Just write something cleaner." Then, "Burn the originals. I want no trace." Then, "Tell the witness what to say. If she hesitates, remind her who's paying her rent." Each sentence worse than the last, more poisonous, more incriminating, more him. Shadow. Didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He sat tall, head up, chest forward. A soldier listening to a confession he had recorded himself. The courtroom wasn't breathing. The walls felt like they were listening. Judge Wright's hand tightened on her gavel until her knuckles turned white. Meanwhile, Hale was unraveling. He stumbled to his feet. "No, Your Honor, these are fabricated. Someone spliced. This is illegal." "Sit down, Mr. Hale." Judge Wright's voice cut through the air like a blade. But the speakers weren't done. Shadow's recorder had caught everything. Every scheme. Every threat. Every lie. "Get rid of the photos from the hallway camera. I don't care how. The bruise report is too detailed. Simplify it. Tell the father to cry. Jurors love that." A woman yelled, "Oh my God!" Another stood up with her hands in her hair. The whole courtroom erupted. He threatened a child. He tampered with evidence. He paid off witnesses. He's finished. Hale was shaking now, so hard his tie slipped sideways. "That's not me. Your Honor, please." Judge Wright slammed her gavel. Bang, bang, bang. "Order!" Her voice shook the entire room, but the final recording was already playing. "Trust me, the kid won't speak. She's nothing." Silence. A heavy, crushing, impossible silence. Then, all hell broke loose. People stood, chairs scraped, jurors recoiled. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. Reporters scrambled for their phones. And Mia, little Mia, stared at the speakers with wide eyes, like she was hearing justice speak for her. Her father covered his face, not in grief but shame, real shame. Shadow pressed gently against Mia's cheek, and for the first time in the entire trial, she breathed without shaking. Judge Wright stood, actually stood, a rare, thunderous act. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice trembling with fury, "you are under immediate investigation for obstruction, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and conspiracy." The bailiff moved toward him. Hale stumbled backward. No, this is Mia. Tell them I tried to help you." And that was the moment Boulder County Court stopped being a courtroom and became a battlefield, where a child and a dog turned the tide. A single button press, a single recording, a single moment of truth. And justice finally, roared louder than fear. After that explosion of truth in Part 10, after every lie Hale ever whispered got blasted through the speakers like gunfire, you'd think the room might stay frozen in shock. But no. The moment reality finally slammed into the courtroom, everything erupted at once. The bailiff moved first, storming toward Hale with this fierce, offended energy, like he couldn't believe he'd spent 3 days politely handing water to a man capable of that level of corruption. Hale stumbled backward, rambling. I want my phone call. This is illegal." Click. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists so fast, the crowd gasped. Metal on skin. Cold. Final. Hale jerked against the cuffs like he still had power, like he could talk or charm or bully his way out. But that was gone. All of it. The courtroom had seen him, heard him, exposed him. He wasn't the smooth-talking golden lawyer anymore. He was a cornered criminal. And Mia, Mia saw it too. She didn't hide, didn't flinch, didn't shrink back into Shadow's fur. For the first time, she sat up straight. Her small hands released their tight grip. Her chest rose and fell normally. No panic, no gasping. Then, before anyone could stop her, she stood. A tiny 7-year-old girl in a giant courtroom, standing like she wasn't afraid of anything anymore. Her aunt whispered, "Mia, sweetie, wait." But Mia stepped forward anyway, moving on her own, and Shadow rose with her, shoulder pressed to her leg in perfect sync. Hale saw her. Even with handcuffs biting into his wrists, he tried, pathetically, to play it cool. "Mia, listen, sweetheart. I know you're upset, but Mia didn't listen. She walked right past him, didn't look at him, didn't give him even 1 second of her attention. Instead, she went to Shadow. Then she broke into a run, tiny shoes squeaking across the polished floor. And she threw her arms around Shadow's neck with more force than anyone expected from someone so small. "Shadow," she whispered, voice trembling, not with fear, with relief, with victory, with something brand new. Shadow pressed his tamatun head into her chest, letting her hold onto him like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. His tail moved once, slow, proud, certain. The room went silent again, not heavy, not suffocating. Silent the way a crowd gets quiet when witnessing something pure, meaningful, heroic. Judge Wright stood, and that alone was enough to restart every heart in the room. Judges don't stand, not unless something big just happened. She placed both hands on the bench and looked directly at Shadow, like she was addressing an officer, not an animal. Today, she said, voice steady but warm, a silent partner of this court protected the truth better than any human here. Shadow's ears twitched. Holloway bowed his head, eyes shining. Mia held him tighter. Judge Wright continued, loud enough for the whole building. This dog upheld the law with more integrity, more courage, and more honor than the defense who claimed to represent justice. Emotion rippled through the room. Tears, shakes of disbelief, soft murmurs of wow. Then she added, "Let the record show that retired K9 Shadow safeguarded the truth when a child could not speak it. He is, in every sense, a hero." A hero. She said hero, in court, on record. Someone clapped. Just once, then another, then the whole room joined in, soft at first, then real, grateful, proud. Mia pulled back just enough to see Shadow's face, her eyes still shiny, still overwhelmed, but clearer, brighter, braver. "Good boy," she whispered, her hand trembling as she stroked his fur. "You saved me." Shadow nudged her chin, gentle, certain, as if to say, "I always will." Officer Holloway stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, if it's appropriate, may the court acknowledge the recording was captured from Shadow's collar during his service?" Judge Wright nodded firmly. "Absolutely." The bailiff tightened his grip on Hale's arm. Hale finally realized there was no way out. No tricks, no loopholes, no manipulation. Not anymore. Because the child he tried to silence and the dog he tried to threaten had defeated him together. And the courtroom knew it, saw it, felt it. Justice had spoken, and its voice was quiet, loyal, and covered in gray fur. After that moment in Part 11, after the applause, the verdict, the shock, the justice, you'd think that would be the end. But life, yeah. Life doesn't wrap itself neatly in one courtroom victory. It keeps moving. It keeps aging. It keeps testing what love really means. Because the truth was, as soon as the case ended, a different countdown began. Shadow was old, not ancient, not fragile, just older than the world had ever been gentle with him. And Officer Holloway knew it before anyone said it out loud. A week after the trial, Mia and her aunt drove out to the Rocky Mountain K9 sanctuary, a quiet stretch of land held in the arms of the foothills. Big pine trees, soft dirt trails, a fence line that felt more like a hug than a barrier. Shadow trotted beside Mia with that same proud bounce he always had. But something was different. Not sad, just slower. Like he knew he wasn't reporting for duty anymore. A woman in a green vest approached. "You must be Mia," she said softly. "We've got a spot ready for Shadow. Nice shady corner. Lots of space. He'll have good company here." Mia nodded, her grip tightening on his collar. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But her throat did that tight, hot thing that happens right before the tears. Shadow sat at her feet, chest pressed against her shin, the way he always had. And for a moment, nobody spoke. The wind filled the silence. Pine needles rustled. Some distant bird sang something small and gentle. Then Mia reached up, shaky fingers brushing Shadow's fur. The little device that had recorded Hale's voice, that had saved her life, still hung from Shadow's collar. It looked tiny now, harmless, like a toy. She unclipped it slowly, almost too slowly. Shadow watched her with tilted head, as if he understood she needed to do this with gentleness, like breaking a thread instead of ripping it. When the recorder came free, Mia held it in her palm. It felt heavier than it looked. It had carried fear, truth, her entire story. But that chapter was over. She slipped it into Officer Holloway's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "He doesn't need it anymore." "Yeah," her voice cracked. "I know." Then she reached into her pocket. A new tag. Silver. Bright. Warm from her hand. One single word engraved. Home. She clipped it onto Shadow's collar. The tiny metal click rang louder in her chest than the courtroom gavel ever had. "Now," she whispered, voice breaking, "you're not just a police dog anymore. You're my home." Shadow pressed his forehead into her knee, and that was when she broke. Not violently, not loudly, just soft tears falling down her cheeks like something she'd held too long. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Please don't forget me." Shadow didn't lick her, didn't nudge her. He just leaned into her. Heavy, warm, steady, the same way he always had in the courtroom, in therapy, in the darkest corners of her memory. Because loyalty, the real kind, the kind that saves your life, never needs words. 10 years later, Colorado looked different now. Or maybe Mia did. At 21, she wore a badge of her own. Not police. Something maybe even more important. Animal-assisted therapy specialist. She worked with kids who had that same hollow look she once carried. The same shaking hands. The same silence caught in their throats. And every time one of those kids touched a therapy dog for the first time, she saw herself. Every single time. One bright Saturday, she drove to the sanctuary again, not to visit a dog in the shade. She walked past kennels, past the oak tree, past the bench where she used to sit with Shadow. until she reached the stone memorial, a row of names, dogs who had served, dogs who had saved, dogs who had given everything. Her fingers traced the carved letters. Shadow loyalty never fails. The silver tag, the one that said home, hung beneath the engraving, polished, shining, new, even after years. Mia crouched down, hair falling forward. For a long time she couldn't speak. Time 300 msemu. Her breath shook. Her throat tightened. Old grief rising. Not painful, just heavy. Then she whispered, quiet, steady, honest. You didn't just save me. You gave me back to myself. The wind moved through the pines, soft and warm, brushing her hair the way Shadow used to lean against her side. Her tears fell, not the tears of a scared little girl, but of someone who healed, who grew, who remembered with love, not fear. She touched the tag one last time. Thank you for staying, she murmured. The breeze shifted, almost like a dog exhaling beside her, and she smiled through her tears. Now honestly, if this were you, would this ending hit you more as 1, beautiful, 2, heartbreaking, or 6, the kind of story you'd remember forever?